Hi, this is Chris Hickson. In about the next 40 minutes, I'm going to lay out for you in great detail everything that I could discern from what I would call the whitewash investigation of what happened between Judge Jesse Kramig and his female subordinate employee, Allison Kersker. Allison Kersker is a young, newly married woman in the courthouse that came to work for the judges and Jesse Kramig and got involved in some sort of affair or something with Jesse Kramig. At one extreme is that she and Jesse Kramig had a sordid sexual affair. At the other extreme is that nothing happened and there are no facts. And then in the middle is that they had an inappropriate non physical relationship. I'm going to go through in great detail everything that happened, the different locations involved, so that you can understand all the elements, all of the key actors, and there's quite a few of them. One of the things, though, that I want to do is make sure that you understand the basic time frames that were involved in what you're going to hear about. So let's look at the key time frames. The affair supposedly took place in the month of June 2023. Towards the end of June, it comes to light, and there are a lot of activities on June 27th, 28th, and 29th. Then there is the long 4th of July weekend, and on July 5th, when they're back, Allison Kersker gets asked questions. The one that stands out the most to me is, was force involved? Which seems like the kind of question you would ask somebody who might have been involved in an actual physical sexual relationship. On July 12th, a special prosecutor is appointed. That is David Fornshaw, the Warren County prosecutor. On July 14th through 17th, the Clermont County Sheriff's Office does a few interviews, and a Captain Chris Allen does those interviews. Then, about 10 days later, on July 26th, the Warren County Sheriff's Office gets involved, a Lieutenant Sean Embleton. Finally, as we get towards September, on September 1, Judge Jason Nagel is finally interviewed. Look at the time frames here. Judge Jason Nagel is not interviewed for 51 days after a special prosecutor is appointed. And then very quickly, 7 days later, on September 8th, Warren County prosecutor David Fornshaw declares case closed. So those are the key time frames that were involved in the events. There are a series of interviews that take place, some of which are video recorded and some of which are audio recorded. I have put all of those interviews unredacted, to my knowledge, online, and you can access them at the web address that is on your screen right now. Hicksperience, HICKSPERIENCE.com/Kramig. One thing that I get asked is what crimes actually took place or what crimes took place. One of the things that I think is clear is that the investigation never tried to actually get at what actually happened. So they never kind of map out what really truly happened. So it's basically predetermined that there weren't going to be any crimes and just did a minimal amount of whitewash cover-up type interviews to be able to say, like, wash our hands of it, everything's okay. But I'm going to put up on your screen now a list of potential crimes that I think should have been looked into, and I think some of them are highly likely to have occurred, some not so much. But just some examples. Gross sexual imposition. That would be, for example, if Judge Kramig did something to compel Allison Kersker to have sex with him or to engage in some sort of sexual activity with him. If they were having sex in the office, for example, or I guess even if they were having their inappropriate non-physical relationship that became the story ultimately when the story kept changing, that would be theft in office. Their time in office is taxpayer money, so if they use it for personal activities, that is theft in office. When Stephanie Boyer tells Allison Kersker to keep her mouth shut at the Chick-fil-A in Milford, which you'll learn about if you watch, that could be coercion. When she is told later, Allison Kersker is told that her job is safe, that could be bribery. Throughout this, I think there's all sorts of instances of either actual or highly potential tampering with evidence or tampering with records, namely destroying records or destruction of evidence while you know that an investigation is going on. And then I absolutely think there's a lot of obstructing official business that goes on, which means lying to an investigator during the course of an investigation. So I think what happened here ultimately is a travesty and an embarrassment. I did the best I could with what I think was a whitewash investigation. But one of the problems is when you do a whitewash, sometimes you didn't bring enough whitewash, and sometimes you made it worse than it was before you put the whitewash on. So, what I'd like you to do now is sit back and let me walk you through at the different locations what happened based on the investigation or whitewash. Then I'll come back at the end and have a few closing comments. So Hunter Lucas and Allison Kersker lived down this street in Amelia. On June 27th, Hunter Lucas surreptitiously recorded his wife having a conversation with a friend of hers about her sexual relationship with Judge Jesse Kramig. He then confronted her and made another recording of her admitting to a sexual relationship with Judge Jesse Kramig. That's per Hunter Lucas to me. That's per his relatives to me. On June 28th, after she's been confronted by her husband, Hunter Lucas, Allison Kersker does not come into work. Stephanie Boyer and coworker Courtney Nelson come out here to Kersker's house, where she is not. They do so under the premise that it is a welfare check because they're afraid that Hunter Lucas is violent. They get here, they find Allison Kersker is not here, but they do nothing at a welfare check anymore. It's at that time that Stephanie Boyer listens to the audio on Hunter Lucas's phone of, I don't know which one, whether it was a surreptitious recording or whether it was the recording he made later. But she listens to that audio. She talks about it in her interview with Detective Chris Allen, but then he never does anything to try to subpoena or get access to the phone to be able to get a copy of that audio or the two audios to see what was admitted to. On June 28th, when Courtney Nelson and Stephanie Boyer returned from going to the Kersker Lucas home, they likely came in through this entrance. This is the back entrance for court personnel into the municipal courthouse. According to Stephanie Boyer, Kramig, Judge Jesse Kramig, was waiting at the door for her, where he wanted to know what she had found out at the Kersker home, and that he said to her, quote, unquote, I fucked up my life. I fucked up my life. That same day, Judge Nagel meets with Kramig and Boyer in Kramig's office, and but Nagel is not interviewed by law enforcement, namely Lieutenant Sean Embleton of Warren County, for 51 days after the special prosecutor had been appointed. So he's not interviewed till September 1st, when he talks about meeting Kramig and Boyer in Kramig's office on that same day. The next day, Kramig asked Nagel to be on a call with him, with some outside lawyers he had contacted. I think one of them is Linda Wilbur, who had been David Ubel's attorney. The purpose of the call was to go over 5 questions that needed to be asked to Allison Kersker. Those 5 questions, when you piece them together, were: was force involved? Was it consensual? Did activities happen in the courthouse? Was anybody else aware of it? And did you, Allison Kersker, feel safe? Those questions all seem to relate to a sexual relationship and trying to forestall any claims of sexual assault or of rape. They seem like very peculiar questions to be asking to Allison Kersker that had been concocted with Kramig being part of coming up with the questions. The very next day after this all came to light at the courthouse on June 28th, that on June 29th, these are the 5 questions. They seem like pretty peculiar questions to be asking if nothing happened at all, there were no facts, and it was all made up. Or it was what later became the story, it had been an inappropriate non-physical relationship. Why would you be asking questions if that was true, about whether force was involved? Also, keep in mind that Judge Nagel said that on the 28th, Kramig told him, explained the situation, and that something had taken place. Nagel is never asked by any investigator, what exactly did Kramig tell you took place? What did he explain was the situation? It's all very peculiar, and it all smells of cover-up. So, one other aspect of this is that the relatives to Hunter Lucas claim that on June 29th or 30th, Judge Nagel met with Kramig and Kersker separately. Judge Nagel, in his interview, whitewash interview, denies that forcefully. But they did meet on July 5th, which is not that far away. It's right after the holiday weekend. That's when they sit down with Kersker. I believe it was Anita Beckman, Stephanie Boyer, and Judge Nagel to assure her on July 5th that her job is safe, which again, how do they know that her job is safe at this point in time? There's no investigation. There's no special prosecutor. On June 29th, when Kersker comes back to work, according to Stephanie Boyer, they come here to the Milford Chick-fil-A. It's quite a drive. They don't go inside, they go through the drive-through. This is where Stephanie Boyer tells Allison Kersker basically to keep her mouth shut, per Stephanie Boyer's interview, that it wouldn't be good for her to tell anybody about anything that happened so that there wouldn't be any gossip. And then remember, after that, on July 5th, is when they have the meeting after the long weekend where she's assured that her job is safe before there has ever been any investigation or any special prosecutor was even appointed. On July 5th, after the long weekend, Nagel, Beckman, Boyer, and Kersker all meet. At that time, Kersker is told that her job is safe. But how do they know her job is safe? Now remember, on Thursday the 29th before, Boyer had taken Kersker to lunch at the Chick-fil-A in Milford. They went through the drive-through and Boyer told her to keep her mouth shut. Now, on the first day back after the long holiday weekend, they're telling Kersker, don't worry, your job is totally safe. But at this point, there had been no investigation. There had been no special prosecutor. There really hadn't been anything that would definitively say whether her job was safe or not. But they want to assure her after she's also been told to keep quiet. Family accounts are that Kersker was offered help in finding another job. That sort of makes sense because you probably would want to separate Kersker and Kramig going forward. That would make sense. I spent a lot of time working on IBM. If something like that happened in IBM, it would be natural to ask the employee if they wanted to transfer to another department or to do something different within the organization. But now they deny that. They deny vehemently that they ever offered her help finding another job. Instead, they're sticking with the story of that Stephanie Boyer told her to keep her mouth shut to prevent gossip at the Chick-fil-A on the 29th, and then the first day back from the long weekend, they tell her that her job is totally safe. This is Sporty's, where Hunter Lucas works as a flight instructor. No one from law enforcement ever comes here to try to ask Hunter Lucas any questions, nor do they go to his house. They call him a few times and basically suggest to him, hey, didn't you already tell us that you don't want to talk to us? It's a complete joke. I had told Sheriff Leahy that based on my contacts with the family, and at the time Leahy didn't know, contacts also with Hunter Lucas, that if Hunter were asked directly about the audio and videos that he had on his phone, that he would give them up and turn them over. But he's never actually asked for them. The law enforcement more or less says, oh, our understanding is you already deleted them. Our understanding is you don't want to cooperate. And thus, they are part of a very distinct cover-up. But as it goes on, Hunter Lucas seems to get edgy that what I had told him, that you're going to get set up and you're going to look like a guy that's a kook that made up complete lies and fabrications because you're delusional about what's going on with your wife and her boss, Judge Jesse Kramig. He goes to Warren County, Detective Lieutenant Embleton, and tells him that Courtney Nelson, if you talk to Courtney Nelson, she's not going to lie. She's going to tell you the truth, and she's got the goods. She's watched them, say they're going one place for lunch, but drive a different direction because they went to a park to have sex. Stuff like this. So what happens is Embleton does talk on August 22nd to Courtney Nelson, but he does it by the phone, and uniquely out of all this, that brief interview is never recorded. When he goes to Clermont County to talk to Judge Nagel, not to try to talk to Judge Kramig or Stephanie Boyer, he makes no effort to talk to Courtney Nelson, or for that matter, Allison Kersker. That is how cover-ups work, my friends. And Lieutenant Embleton, he's either a complete idiot or he was in on the deal, and maybe he's at the lieutenant level because playing along with the games is one way you get promoted in law enforcement, especially in weak, bad law enforcement. On September 1, Judge Nagel is finally interviewed. It's 51 days after a special prosecutor had been appointed, with plenty of time for everybody to get their story straight, to delete evidence, to make sure that people were going to keep their mouth shut. Lieutenant Sean Embleton of Warren County is the person who comes here specifically to interview Nagel. While he's here, he doesn't interview anybody else. Boer, Nelson, Kramig, Kersker, nobody. He just comes here to interview Nagel. And it is almost a comical interview. During the interview, Nagel mentions the 5 questions, and Embleton, like a moron, says, "Are you allowed to tell me what the questions are, or are those top secret?" Why would they be top secret, Lieutenant Embleton? Those questions are not top secret. Remember that Judge Nagel then can only remember a few of them. He remembers, was force involved? Was it consensual? Did she still feel safe? The other ones, I believe, were, did activity happen in the courthouse, and was anybody else aware? So Nagel rattles off the questions he can remember, and he remembers first and foremost, was force involved, which is not a question about nothing happening. That's a question about potential sexual assault allegations. But then Nagel mentions that other people, other staff have told him stories about what happened, but he's not going to repeat them because they're not his accounts. Lieutenant Embleton, there's this does nothing to ask any follow-up question about who were those employees so that he could potentially interview them, because they might have material information. Because why did he not ask these? Because that is how cover-ups work. Probably the most enlightening part of the whole interview is when Nagel says that on the 28th, Kramig pulled him into his office, I believe with Stephanie Boyer, and started to tell him what happened, explain the situation. In the actual interview, Embleton then kind of freezes, and there's like a 5 or 10 second pause where the next logical question that he should have been asking Judge Nagel is, well, what did Kramig tell you happened? But he never asked that question. Instead, after this long pause, he changes the subject. It is such a ridiculous interview, 51 days after. You know, apparently the judges here believe that they should be held to a totally different standard than members of the community that appear before them. Behind me is the Clermont County Prosecutor's Office, home of Prosecutor Mark DeCalvi. His wife, Lori DeCalvi, was one of the candidates for being appointed judge by then Governor John Kasich in the appointment that ultimately Jesse Kramig got. His wife, Lori, at the time was not his wife. He was married to another woman named Lori. He had had an affair with the Lori he's married to now. And all reports that I receive are that she still has a significant grudge against Judge Jesse Kramig. So the prosecutor's office in Clermont County has long sought to control all judicial positions. Today, I believe 9 out of 10 judges in Clermont County, all of them except I think Anita Beckman, are people that spent at least some time here in the Clermont County Prosecutor's Office. It's not a healthy situation to have your entire judiciary, or in this case 90% of your judiciary, be people that all come from only a prosecutor's perspective. The word is that a prosecutor here, Katie Terpstra, is a person that they want to get in a judgeship. The prosecutor's office wants to get in a judgeship. Katie Terpstra is wife of Blair Terpstra, who happens to live in the same precinct that I live in. He was beaten by me in the precinct committee election for the Republican Party, despite him having a greater than $1,000 professional campaign run to try to knock me off and take over my seat. What happened then? He got appointed, so he's on the committee, and I'm suspended for bringing to light the corruption that goes on and the collusion that goes on and the control that goes on in the political system in Clermont County at all levels, the controlling the judges, et cetera, et cetera. But in this piece in particular, we're talking about the cover-up of the impropriety of Judge Jesse Kramig. Warren County Prosecutor David Fornshell was appointed as the special prosecutor on or about July 12th. This is his office in Warren County. He was also the special prosecutor in the Pat Monger affair, the former Clermont County engineer that was convicted and needed to leave office for improper compensation, namely using employees and resources of his office for his campaign and for his personal benefit. Fornshell had actually hid evidence from Judge Haddad relating to the magnitude of the theft that took place. Had that evidence been revealed to Judge Haddad, I don't think he would have accepted a plea deal that would have let Monger off on misdemeanor charges. Monger should have been charged with felonies, which is based on the amount of improper compensation. And he received tens of thousands of dollars of improper compensation over a decade. Pat Monger also used his office to shake down vendors to support things like his golf outing. Fornshell is known as a reliable prosecutor if you need the fix in and the cover up in. So it's not surprising to me that when the Jesse Kramig affair came up, literally and figuratively, they went to reliable David Fornshell. When you look at what he actually did and the results from his office, it's almost comical. I bet that he and others expect that nobody would ever look into it. Instead of addressing citizens directly, Judge Jesse Kramig hired Scott Croswell, a renowned defense attorney, for getting the guilty off scot-free. Croswell immediately went to the press saying nothing had happened. There were no facts. It was fantasy. Kim Bellamy, aunt to Hunter Lucas, comes in here to the Clermont County Sheriff's Office on July 14th. She is interviewed by Detective Christopher Allen, who is on this case and a terrible interviewer. He basically doesn't ask the most fundamental follow-up questions in his interviews of Bellamy or his later interviews of Boer and Kersker. And remember, when he interviews them, the only one who is not videotaped is Allison Kersker, who appears to be being very evasive in her answers. There's even a comment to that effect, but you can't really tell her mannerisms because out of all the interviews that he conducted, that one is not recorded. Just in terms of the track record here, it's important to note that this office, I describe sometimes as the tallest midget, I think they have their heart in the right place, but they have a perfect track record of really being inept at dealing with any political corruption in Clermont County, whether that is people like Archie Wilson, Pat Monger, David Ubel, Greg Simpson, Greg Carson, and now Jesse Kramig. So that's 6 I just rattled off. In all those cases, the only time that there's any real justice is when some other outside agency gets involved, and typically not because of them. For example, in the case of Pat Monger, a person came in with what I think were credible allegations. It got tamped down. Only later, when they separately on their own went to the state auditor, did anything happen in that case. On or about July 19th, WXIX reported that Chris Stratton had circulated a petition for Judge Kramig, and it was also signed by Detective Chris Allen. That detailed information is very difficult to obtain. I checked to see who had made any record request for that information, and the only request was from WXIX, and it was only hours before they reported the story. That tells me that there was some sort of tip-off to WXIX to look into the petitions to try to disqualify the sheriff's office from participating in the investigation, which happened. They were disqualified from participating in the investigation. Who do I think probably gave that tip-off? None other than our favorite attorney, Brian Schreiber, the fixer for Mark DeCalvi, or somebody else in the walls of the Board of Elections that has an in or it wants to get rid of Judge Jesse Kramig. That petition that had been circulated by Chris Stratton and signed by Detective Allen became an out for the Clermont County Sheriff's Office. Steve Leahy referred the case to the Bureau of Criminal Investigation that's part of the AG's office. I pointed out to Leahy almost immediately that that was a conflict of interest worse than the petition because Jesse Kramig had worked for the AG's office and worked with BCI as a special prosecutor. Leahy agreed with me and in a call on July 20th told me that BCI was going to kick the case back citing a conflict of interest. But when BCI actually kicks the case back, there's no reference to a conflict of interest. It's just that they are too busy. Why? Because that's how cover-ups work. That the conflict of interest was never revealed, even though Leahy himself told me that that's the reason why BCI was going to kick back the case. Along the way in this, I would receive some anonymous communications in the mail. I received a letter and brought it here, and there was sort of a rope-a-dope where Stratton and Leahy might get fingerprinted. We're going to really investigate this. And I learned from the Greg Simpson matter that usually is just a rope-a-dope. And so I don't know that anything happened with that letter, but in the actual final report, it makes it sound like I wrote the letter. I didn't write the letter. I brought the letter here. I had received it in my home email. But needless to say, the petition thing
let them get off the hook. They kick it to BCI. Then BCI, instead of being honest that there was a conflict of interest because of Kramig's employment, they then proceed to kick it back, and then Leahy kicks it to Warren County. So now it's both things, the investigation and the prosecution are with the Warren County office. So Prosecutor David Fornshaw and Lieutenant Sean Embleton from the Warren County Sheriff's Office. All of the interviews done here at the Clermont County Sheriff's Office and the very few interviews that Sean Embleton from Warren County did were horrifically poorly done. So Chris Allen, the detective here, is either incompetent or corrupt, or hopefully, I guess, I don't know what's the best answer. Let me give you a few examples of how ridiculous his interviews were. Stephanie Boyer references listening to audio admissions of a sexual relationship between Hunter Lucas's wife, Allison Kersker, and Judge Jesse Kramig. Hunter plays the audio for her from his phone on June 28th at Hunter Lucas and Allison Kersker's home. Chris Allen never follows up on that. And he puts in his report that there was no probable cause to go for extra evidence. I don't know how much more probable cause you need. There were actually 4 or 5 people that referred to this recording or the recordings that were in people's possessions, but never is there subpoena. There's also never any subpoena about social media platforms being used for supposed sexting, for text messages around this. None of that. When people talk about it again and again. When Stephanie Boyer's been interviewed, she talks about that on June 28th, there's all manner of texting going on between employees, trying to get Allison. It's what provokes Courtney Nelson and her to go out to the Lucas and Kersker home. But Chris Allen never follows up on any of that. He never subpoenas anything to see any of that text message to see what people were actually saying. The video interviews, I still find it very curious that both Kim Bellamy, the aunt, she's video recorded, and Stephanie Boyer, the court employee, she's video recorded, but Allison Kersker is not video recorded. She is only audio recorded. She appears to be being very deceptive in her interview, and Chris Allen actually makes some comments about her willingness to answer questions, but you can't see her demeanor, you can't see her facial expressions when any of that is going on. Where does that all point to me? I think it points to cover-up. But it gets worse. In Chris Allen's report, he talks about seeking video surveillance from the courthouse, from the municipal courthouse, at the very beginning. But nowhere in the report does it talk about anybody actually giving him that surveillance, analyzing that surveillance, coming to any conclusions based on the surveillance. Lieutenant Sean Embleton of Warren County never even interviews Judge Nagel till 51 days have passed after the special prosecutor was appointed. 51 days is about 7 weeks. That is longer than the amount of time they retain video in the courthouse. So courthouse video is deleted after 5 to 6 weeks. So they made sure that before anybody put stuff on the record in an interview, especially people in important positions like Judge Nagel, there wasn't going to be no evidence that could say that what they were saying was lying. It's all extremely suspicious. The last thing I want to say is a good law enforcement interview, ask somebody to tell the same story a few times. Why? Because when you're lying, you tend to change things in the story. When it happened to you for real and you're telling a true story, you don't change things in the story. Another common technique is ask the person to tell the story in reverse order. Instead of A, B, C, D, E, tell it E backwards. Why? Because when you memorize lies, you memorize them in order, A, B, C, D, E. But things that actually happen to you, you can remember them either front order or back order. So you trip people up when they're telling lies by asking them to tell the story in reverse order. You see none of that in any of these interviews, absolutely none. If anything, the interviews are leading, presumptive, never ask key questions about what actually happened, what did he tell you happened, what do you think happened, what did you see? None of that happens. It all smacks of a cover-up where the fix is in to yet again in Clermont County protect somebody who is in a position of power within the political system. Along the way, the auditor's office provided information on the raise history for Allison Kersker. It showed she got 32% in raises in just 22 months. Courtney Nelson was hired at about the same time as Allison Kersker. She also got 32% pay increases in about the same time period of 22 months. But in the investigation, they were trying to make it seem like this was normal. And they did not return the race history of two other employees, Mindy Menzel and Lana Stalteri, who also are in basically the same area. They only returned Allison Kersker and Courtney Nelson. I'm betting that Mindy Menzel and Lana Stalteri did not get 32% raise increases. I've asked for the records. I've been given incomplete records. I've asked again. I'm still trying to get the records. And it sends a hint to me of what the records probably show, is that Kersker and Courtney Nelson got these above market raises over that 22-month period, which means that Nelson might have been a beard. What does that mean? You got to give her the same raise so that if this comes to light, or if she, Nelson, were to bring it to light, that we're protected, because it doesn't look like we were really giving favorable treatment to Allison Kersker on a 32% raise in 22 months. But the truth will be only come from looking at what Mindy Menzel and Lana Stalteri's raises were along those periods. None of the investigators, nor the press, actually looked into that there's actually 4 people in that office in the same basic category, and the raise history of all 4 is relevant to this investigation. Lieutenant Sean Embleton is assigned to the case, but he seems confused right from the start. He claims repeatedly that he's reviewing the work of Clermont County Sheriff's Office investigation, but the Clermont County Sheriff's Office didn't do an investigation. They only did a few interviews. So his whole narrative makes no sense. He basically does very little to nothing. This guy, Lieutenant Sean Embleton, is either amazingly dumb and low IQ, or he is corrupt and knew that the fix was supposed to be in. For example, there's so many examples, but for example, he gets keycard data on the movement of Allison Kersker and Jesse Kramig through the building. He does absolutely no analysis of that other than to say, well, there were no late night keycard swipes or early in the morning before anybody was there. Come on, Lieutenant. These 2 people were married. They're not going to be doing their affair when their spouses are home in the evening or in the morning. The allegations were that the affair took place in the office, in the courthouse, during work hours, in the parking lot, in the car, during work hours, at the park, during work hours. What kind of idiot would then say, well, nothing to see here because the data on the key cards, all I looked at was that there were no late night swaps. His work is, I guess some people in law enforcement get appointed to levels like lieutenant based on politics versus on professional policing. I don't know about this lieutenant, but he should be embarrassed at the work he did here. He talked to Courtney Nelson after Hunter Lucas had told him questions to ask her, but he didn't record the interview. What does that tell you? The only interview that I'm aware of that was not recorded of everybody was Courtney Nelson. Later, he did that, I believe, on 8/22. On 9/1, when he goes to Clermont County to talk only with Judge Nagel, he never makes any attempt to talk to Courtney Nelson. What does that tell you? The fix is in. We are trying to make sure that nothing happens. His job was clearly not, in his eyes, to get to the truth, but it was to bury the truth, and probably with the expectation that nobody would dig into it. I'm going to give you, I think I have here, 4 examples of comical Lieutenant Embleton things from interviews you can watch. I've put all the interviews in a playlist. When Nagel says to Lieutenant Embleton that Kramig explained to him what happened on June 28th, there's a long pause, like he doesn't know what to do. And Embleton, instead of asking the obvious question, which was, what did he tell you? He changes the subject to something else. Nagel is interviewed by Embleton on September 1st in Nagel's office. And during the interview, he says, well, I don't have my calendar. But Embleton never says, hey, we're in your office. Why don't you get your calendar so you can actually look at the dates when we're doing this interview? Never does that. Almost like Keystone Cop comedy. Embleton acts during the Nagel interview like there's some sort of special secrecy around judges. For example, when Nagel mentions these 5 questions that seem to deal with sexual assault or rape, such as was force involved, he first, before Nagel tells him any of the questions, Embleton says, are you allowed to tell me what the questions are that you ask Allison Kersker? It's almost comical. Another one that I highlighted is that when Nagel says other people in the courthouse have told him stories about what happened, Embleton never asks what other people, so that he can go talk with them and see if they have any firsthand accounts or evidence. The whole thing is a joke. And this guy drove all the way from here, Warren County, to Clermont County, to the municipal courthouse to interview Judge Nagel, never tries to talk to Courtney Nelson, never follows up with Stephanie Boyer, never tries to talk to Judge Kramig, and never follows up with Courtney Nelson or anybody. So the whole thing is just a joke. And maybe Lieutenant Embleton gets an award for doing the cover-up the way he was supposed to, but I think he should be embarrassed. And he's, frankly, I don't know if this guy has kids, but are his kids ever going to ask him, hey, Dad, were you an honest cop? Did you do a good job? Did you make sure that people in power were held accountable for what they did and you didn't allow predators? Maybe Lieutenant Embleton has a daughter. And maybe he should think about what happens if an older man preys upon his daughter in a work setting when that older man is her superior. On September 8th, David Fornshaw, the prosecutor here in Warren County, who had been appointed as a special prosecutor, rubber stamps in a very brief letter the quote-unquote investigation, saying that he reviewed the evidence and there are no criminal charges. But he did, in that letter, say, if more evidence should become available, my office would be willing to review this decision at your request. So, Prosecutor Fornshaw, let me give you a few of the pieces of evidence that you might have missed along the way. There were at least 5 people who had mentioned audio recordings of Allison Kersker, either with her husband or with her friend. Why was there no subpoena to try to get copies of those recordings from anybody? Why was there no subpoena when an equivalent number of people were directly involved in text messaging around when all these things happened? Why was there no subpoena to look at those text messages and what was said? Why wasn't it concerning to your office that Stephanie Boyer had lunch with Allison Kersker, told her to keep her mouth shut, and then in a subsequent meeting with her and Judge Nagel and Judge Beckman, told her that her job was safe? That was before a special prosecutor was even appointed. The lunch took place on June 29th. The meeting at which Allison Kersker is told that her job is safe is on July 5th. The long holiday weekend was over that time. So on June 29th, Kersker is told at the Chick-fil-A in Milford by Stephanie Boyer to keep her mouth shut. And then on July 5th, Judge Nagel, with Stephanie Boyer in the room, tells Allison Kersker, don't worry, your job is safe. That's at the same time that they were asking the 5 questions, such as was any force involved, which seems like a very strange question to ask if nothing happened or if all that happened was an improper, non-physical relationship. Judge Jesse Kramig is endorsed by the Clermont GOP. When some committeemen wanted him to appear before the committee to tell us what actually happened, the leadership, namely Chairman Charles Tassel and Central Committee Chairman Jeff Corcoran, blocked it. They're protecting Kramig. It's a long history here. Ask about Archie Wilson. Look up Archie Wilson. So Jesse Kramig is on your ballot in November. Funny, the Democrats don't even run candidates in races like judges. They didn't even put a candidate on a ballot when these issues came to light. It's a very cozy relationship of collusion between the two parties. The Democrats stay out of races so that the Republicans don't have to spend on races or primaries, and as a result, the Democrat lawyer class then doesn't get blackballed from county business and Clermont County business. It needs a change. Most of all, we need to stand up for conservative values. I'm a member of the Clermont GOP, and I refuse to let us be dumbed down to the level of protecting a predator who is preying upon a 24-year-old subordinate in the office, especially when that person purports to be a family values conservative judge. A family values conservative judge, Jesse Kramig. He probably doesn't belong on the bench. He certainly should make himself available to the committee to answer questions and tell us what exactly really happened.
So there you go. That's my attempt to put together for you an analysis of what the whitewash investigation shows and what potentially happened. So you can kind of come to your own conclusion. What do you think really happened ultimately? I know what I think. Was there actually a sordid sexual affair in the courthouse building? Was it nothing happened at all, as Scott Croswell said? Or was it whatever the hell an inappropriate non-physical relationship is? However you slice it, it's embarrassing. It's bad for Clermont County. And I can't see how the Republican Party and Clermont Countyans can say it is okay for a judge to engage in this kind of behavior and then have any credibility over citizens that come before him. Hopefully, somebody will see this and do more real investigation. I am not law enforcement. I'm just a citizen. I have no financial interest in this. I just think it's wrong. And we have a history in this county of covering things like this up to protect people in power, especially when they're part of the Republican Party, of which I am a part. We need to clean it up. And I hope this helps. And I hope you found it informative and useful.